I mean, it's really the artist. I mean, we are the representative of the artist. And so when they hear, I mean, the best outcome is when an artist says, I finally feel like I'm hearing my music. Then you're like, my job is done here.
Yeah.
It's awesome. And so that's really who we're doing it for.
Hello, welcome to another episode of 2020. My name is Cory here, as always, with Siobhán Cronin and Benny Goodman. And today we have a super cool episode for me personally, because we actually get to dive a little bit more into the audio engineering side of the music industry. And we're going to be talking to Jonathan Wyner, who is a mastering engineer, and he's also a professor at Berklee School of Music. The guy has done so much. And he's just so full of knowledge that I learned.
Yeah, but don't feel alienated, because me, as the audio idiot in the group, actually, this conversation felt pretty good. I mean, there's a lot that you can learn.
Don't be so hard on yourself.
All right, I've gotten better.
As a shallow person, I'm just going to say he worked with David Bowie and Bruce Springsteen and Frank Zappa, and there's a bunch of people I've listened to. So for those reasons alone, he's cool.
Yeah, and you know, this is an area of music that most people may not be aware of unless you're actually working kind of in the technical side of things. So I think it's eye-opening to anyone who just likes listening to music and wants to know why it sounds so good coming out of the radio.
Yeah, learn what a mastering engineer actually does.
So let's check it out. Part 1.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Benny Goodman. I'm here with my cohorts in crime, as my phone has auto-corrected. Cory Peza and Siobhán Cronin, certainly not in order of intelligence. But today we're breaking new ground, because we're going to answer a really an important question, I feel like, for everyone in the music industry, because we have, according to our friend Shota, a good friend of the show, he's a legendary, this is how the email was, legendary mastering engineer. His name is Jonathan Wyner, and he's worked with David Bowie, Bruce Springsteen, Amy Mann. Like, his list is, I'm not even going to go there. We'll let him talk about it, but
I feel
you're breaking
unworthy
new
of being
ground.
on this show.
No.
Jonathan,
You just
on behalf
live
of
on
all
trend.
musicians, what is mastering?
Really? Do you really want to know?
Yes,
You really
I've
wanna
been
know?
paying
So would you-
$9.99 to a subscription service I just send to some kid in Somalia every track I do.
Yeah. Well, which answer do you want? I can give you. So look, what is it? It's changed. First of all, let me just say it's changed over the years. What it is right now is, and in some sense, it really is still the same as it ever has been. Somebody sends you a recording, they send you a mix, and you listen to it and you think, how is this going to compare to every other record that's out there? Does this record sound as good as it can? If the answer is in that order, pretty good, and yes, you let it go out the door. If the answer is, something needs to be done here to protect the artist from being embarrassed or not fully realizing their artistic vision, the answer is, hang on a second, I'm going to fix this, or I'm going to do something to make this sound better. That's sort of at the crux of it. But when the whole discipline started, it was like way back in the day when there weren't mastering engineers, there were just transfer engineers with lab coats who were paid by record labels to just take a master tape and transfer it to a vinyl master that could be cut into vinyl, and they really just didn't give a damn about how it sounded so long as the level was more or less good. And there was this guy named Doug Sachs who was bold enough to say, if I just take a bunch of this crap out of the circuit, your records will actually sound better. And he proposed this to the folks at the record label. The label shall be named Left. I'll leave the name out. And the label said, well, what we need to do? And he said, well, it'll probably cost you a few $100 to rewire the circuitry. And you want to spend money on that? Hell no.
Only a few $100?
Well, this was in 1962.
Fair
or
enough.
Something.
Yeah.
And so Doug Sachs said, well, I'm just going to start a mastering studio. And he was the first mastering engineer who cared enough to try to get the sound as close to the original master and as good as possible. And that set the whole thing off. But there's like a whole bunch of sort of things to think about when we master records, but it all comes down to making sure that the artist is represented as well as possible. I mean, we're building a bridge between an artistic vision and what the listener experiences. And this is like the last stop.
Yeah, that's a really great way of explaining it. And I'm curious, so in the scenario of, yes, this is accomplishing the artistic vision and it's as good as it's going to sound, is that to say that the mastering engineer, I mean, is there little to nothing that you would do in that scenario, or does that almost never happen?
The answer is yes and yes. Like, it almost never happens. But so I worked on a record. It was a classical record, maybe 22 years ago or something. It sounded amazing. Came in from the Seattle Symphony Orchestra, clarinet concerti with Richard Stoltzman. Amazing. I listened to it. Anything I tried to do to it was just going to make it sound worse or different, but not better. So I was like, you know what? It sounds great. Let's go. I just did a little editing. It won Stereophile Record of the Year because I did nothing to it. So that's the right thing. And I got paid. It was like, great.
Oh, man, I love that story. That does not sound like all the record stories.
But your ear is what you're getting paid
exactly.
for.
It takes a lot of experience to know when not to do something.
Right.
Well, right. I mean, so you think about a producer, sitting in the control room, and on the other side of the microphone is fill in the blank of your favorite vocalist. Beyonce, Barbara Streisand. They deliver a killer performance. What are you going to do? Ask them to do something different? Right?
Right.
So a lot, and we're kind of in a service to the artist. So we're trying to make sure that the best thing happens that could possibly happen. But in response to the question, most of the time you got to do something. I mean, you have to do something to make sure that when the record shows up on Spotify or shows up on vinyl or wherever the heck it's going to go, that it's going to stand up.
I want to dive real deep into the mastering stuff. For myself, I'm a producer and a mix engineer, so this is like my favorite episode we've ever done here because I'm going to answer all my own questions. But for our listeners, before we do that deep dive, now that we've kind of established what mastering is in general, I would like to kind of just get your background a little bit and find out how someone gets into this area, which is, to most people on the other end of the radio, pretty much unheard of.
I grew up in a family of musicians who were also iconoclasts. I mean, they were musicians who were like, let's forge new ground. Let's not sort of redo what's been done in the past, which predisposed me to being really interested in the marriage of music and technology. When I first got a whiff of, I mean, even if it was like, the Temptations when I was a kid, listening to the radio, and I heard Psychedelic Shack and the crazy sound and the vocals at the beginning of that record, I was like, what the heck was that? Or, listening to electronic classical music as opposed to Beethoven. And so I was already like, music and technology and where it can take us and the new things that we can do, this is what I have to do. And there really wasn't, I mean, the world wasn't set up in such a way that there was a profession that was like studio engineer or producer. Not really. I mean, there were a few famous producers back then, but people who were involved in making records were either live on tour or working in radio stations or in garages, but there just weren't that many studios proper. So I just kind of made my way. I mean, I found places where I could start to learn about using the technology.
Were you playing an instrument, or can I ask what your family, what sort of music, like instrumentally or genre, like what was going on, and what instruments were you touching? What were you working on?
Everything. I mean, I played music before I spoke English, so I would play whatever you wanted me to play. I mean, I was kind of that kind of kid, and I ended up at the end of high school being the only person who was willing to even think about playing the French horn. So I came out of high school playing French horn. My degree in college was French horn performance and composition, but I was running my French horn through an ARP 2600. I was not playing Mozart. I mean, I had to play Mozart to get out of college to play my recital, but the things that I was doing with tape and electronics with the horn, I wanted to turn the horn into something nobody had ever heard before.
Can I ask where you went to school?
I went to Vassar College. I was a Vassar girl.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm always interested, like educational institutions and their openness to unconventional approaches to music. Because even as someone that went to college in 2007 to 2014 era, it was still very, very square in terms of you are a violinist and you will study orchestral excerpts and you will not cross over with anything outside of that.
With all due respect to all of my friends who are amazing classical instrumentalists, that to me was like close to dying, to try to live that existence.
Yeah,
I was
accurate.
undercover. I mean, Vassar, nobody at Vassar was paying any attention. We had like 6 people in the music department, and everybody who was teaching was sort of quasi checked out. And so I got the keys to the recital hall, I got the keys to play with the synthesizers, and I became the program director of the radio station. So we'd make these really wacky electronic recordings and then play them over the air at 2 a.m. in the Hudson Valley and terrorize people. It was awesome. But
That's amazing.
Nobody at the school was sanctioning anything, you know.
You were just going rogue.
We were totally going rogue. So anyway, sort of, I'll skip over a bunch of steps, but I was offered a gig in a mastering studio. I didn't go looking for the gig. But at the time when I was offered the gig, mastering was really cool because it was the first place that digital was happening. That was in a way that, because it was only stereo instead of trying to like do multi-channel recording, it was only, $50,000 to get into a system as opposed to $250,000 to do a multi-track. So it was an opportunity to get into this new technology. And I was like, well, this is kind of cool. So let me investigate what this is. So I got a gig.
Are you talking about the compact disc?
It was at the birth of the compact disc. Have you heard of a compact disc?
I have.
Yes, there you go. There you go. We're dating ourselves.
We're not young enough to not know about the compact disc.
I actually just finished 2 records in the last week where both clients are manufacturing CDs. It's still a thing.
Yeah.
Because they can sell them. But anyway, but the technology was like magic and fragile, and there were very few people doing it. And that led to some amazing opportunities. Because there were some artists who were thinking about reinventing themselves or were fans of new technology who signed on with a record label I was doing a bunch of work for, namely Rykodisc. And those artists were named Frank Zappa and David Bowie, and actually Ringo Starr was one of the artists for whom we did a record, and Paul McCartney's brother. I don't know if anybody knows that Paul McCartney has a brother.
I did not.
And anyway, there's a whole bunch of interesting opportunities that came about because it was the early days of digital.
So can I ask you, when you said you got the gig, a mastering gig, were you doing actual mastering, or was it sort of you were among other people that were doing it? Like, what was? Because I feel like if I were thrown into that, I would say I don't know what's going on here.
Right. Well, in the golden era of the studio work, there was such a thing as like being trained. And so I was like hired to be the QC engineer, and I got paid to listen for a year to records and make sure nothing was screwed up. Mm-hmm. So, there were no dropouts. There was nothing was wrong in the record, and I sort of got the notes and checked against what I was hearing, and gradually moved into starting to do the work. But I was trained on the job. And before that, I was mixing records and producing records, and I'd had started to have some success as a producer and an engineer with labels like Celluloid and some of the sort of new hip indies in the mid 80s, but mastering just took me in this other direction.
So you were doing the mixing prior to getting the mastering job?
Yes, that's right. And so, kind of coming all the way around to your question about how do you get into this? I mean, it's pretty easy nowadays to learn the rudiments of like the gestures of mastering. It's like with painting, you can figure out how to get a canvas and to get some paint and get a brush. But in terms of figuring out how to compose the thing and get the thing out of your head onto the canvas, that takes a while. And so to learn how to master, it's really helpful to have mixed for a while, to understand what have some empathy and understanding of production and recording, and then get some practice in. And it takes a while.
What's empathy?
Yeah. What is empathy?
That is your only contribution to all these.
I don't know what that means.
I'll tell you what it means is that when somebody hands you a record that's really messed up, and you can tell they've put a lot of effort into it and done the best that they could. I mean, you have two choices. One is to tell them to go away, or the other is to figure out, oh, these people are really try to do something here. How can I help? That's what I'm talking about.
That's a great tip. This makes me think of my husband, who has he's a guitar player, recently gotten into mixing a lot. And he has basically, he does have empathy, but he doesn't have a whole lot of tact.
I would vouch to his empathy.
He doesn't have a whole lot of tact when it comes to telling me. I remember one time I spent all day and I was so excited. I recorded like an excerpt of a classical piece, like all these layers of violins. And he listened to it and he's like, "Did you think this sounded good?" And I was like, and of course, he wasn't talking about the playing or the performance. He was talking about like the fact that I didn't pan anything and it was an absolute mess, which I have since learned to do better. But yeah, I can complete, yes.
It was
so
a
empathy and
method.
tact, very, very, I'm sure very important when it comes to building a career.
Well, that's probably because you weren't paying him. I mean,
that's a loaded topic.
Okay. Fine.
No, I was not paying him, but
right. If you were paying him, you'd probably figure out another way to offer some advice.
Fair enough.
In terms of the mixing versus mastering, this is something that's always fascinated me. Having worked with a lot of mixers and a lot of mastering engineers, what was it about mastering that you decided to go that direction, since you were doing the producing and the mixing prior to that?
Yeah. What really turned me on about it is the variety. So as a mastering engineer, in order to make a go of it, you kind of have to work on a different record every day. An A-list mixing engineer might mix 10 records a year because it takes time, and you get paid accordingly. For mastering, it's a day. I mean, there have been some instances where it's been longer, but by and large, that's what it is. And so there's just not that many like reggae records to go around, right? So today it's reggae, tomorrow it's, metal, the next day it's classical. And I really loved that. I really loved working across so many different musical genres. I miss some of the creativity that is part and parcel of mixing and production. So there's a trade-off there. It is not the most creative part of the production process, although it's remarkable what you can do and still be incredibly subtle and yet make real differences. But it's a totally different thing.
Who appreciates that?
That's a great question.
Because I feel like I'd appreciate it. I think Cory would appreciate it. Siobhán, I feel like on paper would appreciate it, but if you didn't tell her, may not even know.
Yeah.
I think fucking with you, Siobhán.
It's a good point. I mean, it's really the artist. I mean, we are the representative of the artist. And so when they hear, the best outcome is when an artist says, "I finally feel like I'm hearing my music." Then you're like, my job is done here.
Yeah.
It's awesome. And so that's really who we're doing it for.
Do you feel like it requires a lot of sort of groundwork in either having had experience of recording or mixing lots of different genres before? Because I could imagine, classical music, for example, is my home base, right? So if I hear a classical piece that I'm familiar with, I know what I want it to sound like. But sometimes I might listen to a song and I'm like, I don't know whether I like this or don't like this, or it's good or bad, because I'm just totally unfamiliar with this soundscape and this genre.
Yes. The answer is totally yes. I teach at Berklee College of Music, and one of the things I have to work with students to stop doing is trying to fit everything into what they think the sound of a record is. And, I've so many times I've heard kids try to take like a jazz recording and match the low end to an 808 kick drum in a hip hop track. And it's just like, that's not what the instrument is doing. It's not the role in this music. So let's pull back and think about what everybody's role is. Like, what is everybody supposed to be doing in the genre? So you have to understand it. Otherwise you're going to make mistakes.
Can you demystify something else for me? Is analog actually better than digital? What should I be telling people at parties when I try to sound smart?
The answer
You're a
is
vibe tonight, Ben.
The answer is there's no difference.
Wow, that's a monumental statement, because I feel like a lot of people do argue about this, and I'm not even really a techie person. Elaborate.
I'm lying, but no. But it's also it.
I was excited to go down that rabbit hole, but
No, so it's both totally true that they are completely the same, because it's just sound, right? Whether it's described as voltage in a wire or by numbers representing waveforms, it's the same damn thing. There are some subtle differences between the two. There's some things that happen when you go into digital that don't happen in analog, and vice versa. But there is no better. I mean, really, it's, if you can imagine a color, a sound that you want to get, and you can get there, it kind of doesn't matter how you get there. So there's some amazing, weird transformers wound with metal from the center of the earth that if you run signals through, there are these devices that have color to them that are kind of unusual and unique, but we can kind of replicate all of that in digital. It's just sometimes harder.
Has it always been that good? Because I feel like
no.
So this is where I'm at. So
Yeah.
I grew up in a time, I am. I think, I don't know, they call us a zennial or something like that. So
I think you're a millennial, are you not?
No. Born in 1982, a very small group of people. Where when I was born,
Of course, you're special. How dare
we're
I
special,
ask?
yeah. There were beepers. You had to use a phone. There were still rotary phones. There was no internet. But we were alive when cell phones did become a thing. We were alive when dial-up became a thing. But that was an exponential difference in technology, because now everyone has cameras, they have computers and all that. But when I was born, having an Apple IIc meant you were a rich person. And so that's a crazy time to be alive. So I was lucky to have recorded. I was telling you this last night at dinner, to have recorded it at Longview Farm Studios in North Brookfield, because we actually had to bring in a Pro Tools rig to an analog setup, because that was when they started having digital backup. You could start doing the tracks from the tape. And I'm so lucky that I actually got to sit there and work with a tape machine and go through a Neve console, because at this point, technology, I mean, even in the last 10 years, I almost feel like there is no reason for that other than you want to sit in front of a huge board. And that's how much technology. Now you can't, the painter can't blame his paints. You can't say, I don't have an SSL board. You literally have so much technology that it's like you're blinded by science. And now you just have to be Thomas Dolby.
Right. You just took us someplace. So
He always does.
We go lots of places.
Get ready.
yes, no. Well, I went there last night. So yeah.
When you're with Ben, you always go somewhere you don't plan.
It's good. It's good. I'm susceptible. But so to go back, here's the thing. I mean, it's fun to work with. It's like when you play different guitars, right? Each guitar has a sound. You could probably replicate that. But if you just pick up the tool or the instrument and it immediately does this thing, that's really lovely, and there's less friction in the whole process. And that's sort of one of the nice things about analog. If there's a color you're after, you just grab the color, as opposed to turning the thing on and pulling up a plug-in and doing this and whatever. That's a workflow enhancer for sure. But the other thing that was, I mean, I actually am so glad I don't have to work with tape anymore, because it was just time consuming, and the minute you made a recording, it would start to degrade. And if you went back to it a year later, the top end would never come back the same way anymore. And, it's expensive, and it's not even environmentally responsible. But anyway, but the cool thing about it, and this is the only thing I really, really miss about the console and the tape machine, is that you had to work slower and you had to make choices right up front. And we don't have to do that anymore. You can have like a zillion tracks on your Apple M1 keyboard, or a computer and, record like for the rest of your life and never have to make any decisions because there's still one more track to fill up, right?
Yeah.
I very much relate to this.
Yeah, you have like 24 tracks maximum. We were lucky when I was a kid when we didn't even have we had 8 tracks or 4 tracks. And we had to like mix stuff like right now. It's like, you got a drum kit? I'll give you 2 tracks for that.
Yeah.
So you got to mix it.
I used to make video from a VCR to another VCR, and I thought that I was stealth.
There you go.
I will say from the mixing perspective and the time that I came up with in the last 10 years or so, while I had been in studios when I was younger and seen the tape and the console and everything, I never understood it at that point. I was just on the musician side of things. And so coming into mixing and production and everything, I always had every tool imaginable at my fingertips, which is the worst situation ever because now I own thousands of plugins that I haven't opened in a decade. And I now, at this point in my career, use like 3 or 4 plugins to do everything. But I had to go through this phase of having this idea that, this thing is going to make me sound better. This thing's going to make me sound better. All these like flashy things and the gear and all this stuff and the newest everything. And that's how I get better at mixing. And then seeing, contemporaries and people, that I have had a chance to work with that came up in the situation where they were so limited, their instincts are so sharp because of that, because there was no, the new shiny thing. It was like, oh no, we need to solve this with the 3 things we have in front of us. And so they're so locked in on that.
And it's more about practicing making quick decisions and instinctive decisions and being willing to make mistakes and then living with them. I mean, I made some really, really bad recordings early on, but I had to make those decisions. And then later I was like, okay, I'm going to do that differently next time.
Isn't that just arrogance, though? Because, I feel like that's maybe why I'm good, is because I'm just kind of arrogant, and Cory just kind of sits there and snarfs at me and goes, and then fixes things every once in a while. But for the most part, I make decisions blindly.
No, I think your perspective changes. It's with experience. It's just like when you go back and listen. Yeah, I think as you develop your craft, you can elaborate on this more, but yeah, your ear changes as you improve in your skill.
I'll tell you what my skill is I know when things are terrible, and when I don't feel like it's horrible, I know I'm onto something.
I do know so there are some people who just learn faster and are quicker to sort of develop good instincts than others. I don't think I was a particularly fast learner. And I have met some people and some young people who are just like spot on, and I'm like, whoa, like you're really good at what you do. That's not most people, but there are people like that. And so everybody can get there, but some people take longer.
One thing you said, that you at one point you made some records that there were a lot of mistakes, and then hopefully you never make those mistakes again. But you have to make those mistakes to know that you shouldn't make them. One thing that I run into a lot with clients is we'll work on something, really put a lot of effort into a piece of music, and by the end of it, it might sound amazing sonically. Maybe I did my job and they're happy with it, but they don't like their own performance, or they don't like the song anymore because, they've been spending so much time on it. Now they think they can do better in something. And one of the biggest lessons I learned was putting out something that wasn't perfect and letting it go so that the next thing can be, incrementally better. Because I had that same problem where I have, Ben and I have hard drives full of songs that'll never see the light of day. And it took many years for me to have the confidence to put something out that I wasn't 100% behind. Not that I didn't think it was worth putting out, but that I didn't think was where it could be. But it always made me go to the next project like, well, I have to beat that last one.
Right. And there are stories about famous records that came out full of mistakes, and the mistakes were some of the coolest things. Mm-hmm. You've heard the story about Creep, the Radiohead tune.
I don't know if I have.
Are you familiar with that song where it starts very stripped down, and then like midway through the first verse, there's this the sound of the guitar coming on, and this that. There was a guitar track. The
best part of the absolute best part of the song.
Exactly. There was a guitar. That guitar track was supposed to be on from the beginning, and Paul Coldery, who was mixing that track, forgot to unmute it, and so he was mixing it, and it was like, "Oh shit!" and pulls up
and
the
then
mute,
Genius
and
arose.
that happened. And he turns to the band and says, and this is at Fort Apache.
Fort Apache,
in
R.I.P.
Cambridge.
Cambridge.
Anyway,
Oh.
so so he's like, I got to go back. And they're like, are you kidding me? That was like genius. Like, don't. And so
To this
right?
day, I got to tell you, I'm not a huge Radiohead fan. I actually saw them on the Benz tour, and then I saw them more recently, and I was like, why do you have two drummers? That makes no sense. You need to get two coffee machines. But I got to tell you, and they don't play the song. They're one of those bands that are like, oh, our biggest song ever. We're just not going to play it. They did it in Mansfield, Massachusetts, and I got to tell you, everybody in there,
that's right.
everyone, because they're one of those. First off, they don't play it, so when they play it, everyone's staring at his hand, waiting.
They're just waiting. And
that's because the guy just punched him in on the master.
That's it. That's it.
That's great. I thought they were genius for something because, I don't understand Radiohead, and people said, well, why are they genius? I would have said that song. That would have been my instance. And now
it's all
we
my
know
jazz
it's the
friends
mastering
that are very
engineer.
into Radiohead. I feel like jazz musicians are like
I
all my
think-
jazz friends are really into them.
I think they're fantastic in the sense that they are so themselves. They've got a sound, their production sensibility, and Nigel Godrich is really interesting the way he uses distortion, the way he pans stuff around. And Tom York's voice is sort of a weird foil against the instrumentation. I don't love everything they've done equally well, but I enjoy what they do very much.
See, there's just Muse, though, for me. When I heard Muse the first time, I was like, wow, did the guy from Radiohead do a solo project and all of a sudden sound way better? And then I just realized, no, that's Matt Bellamy, who plays guitar better than Tom York, who sings better than Tom York. And then they do like avant-garde. See, that's me, though, because that's the thing with music. It's subjective. That's my opinion, and that's what I love about it, is that we can argue about it all day, and nobody's technically right.
Nobody is technically right. That's right. But I've definitely undergone an evolution, probably because of my profession, where I've come to look inside, like everything that I'm handed, I try to look deep inside it and find something interesting. And I kind of have to. And I've worked on a lot of projects that I don't like. And so in order to do that and to be in the space with it, you have to figure out like what's interesting, what's in here, what are they trying to do? Otherwise.
Let me ask you, you mentioned earlier a lot of this is like in the period of a day. If you're mastering something in a day, how do you get yourself in that mindset? Because when I think of myself recording or doing anything, I always feel like there's a period of time that I have to let stuff sink in and, go back and listen to it. And there's like some changes that happen mentally with just letting it settle. How do you have that whole spectrum of a process in a day?
Well,
that's fascinating to me.
You practice it and you get good at it, at making the sort of initial assessment. I won't say that I would love to be able to like listen to something, go away for 2 days and then come back and do the gig, but I don't always have that luxury. And the other thing I would really love that I don't always get to do is listen to a band play live before I work on their record. Mm-hmm. Because there's something that you get when you do that you don't get when you just hear the thing that came out of the studio. But again, sometimes that's just, we're required to do it. One of the sad sort of, and this is kind of an inside like mastering engineer commiseration joke, but when a band comes up with the idea of we're going to make a record, the first thing they do is they set their release date. Right? It's like, okay, and so it's like, we're going to use the first month to track the guitars. Well, we need an extra week. And then we're going to use the next month to do this, and we need an extra week. And, you've got this immovable object, which is they've announced the release date and the concert, and you've got this fast-moving object, which is the production process. And mastering ends up having to happen like right.
And you were,
there.
shortly before it collides.
And it's
In
like,
all its
okay,
chaos.
here we go. Let's get this thing out the door. And so that happens. And occasionally I've gotten calls from record labels in a couple of cases where they've asked me if I was done with the record and they hadn't sent me the audio yet. That's That's how twisted it can get.
You should have said, "Yeah, did you pay me though?"
I thought that's right. That's usually
"You
what I
already
say,
sent it."
and then I remind them that they haven't sent me the audio, and then they go away.
Oh my gosh. Well, let me ask you. So we were talking earlier. You said there's kind of two scenarios: either don't touch it, it's great, or the alternate version, which is something has to be changed. What is kind of the spectrum of possibilities in that scenario? So have you ever been in a situation where people have to go back and re-record stuff? Is it more a matter of the mix needs to be changed? Like, what are some of the different things that happen when something needs to be fixed outside of your actual technical moving around?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's like multiple scenarios. There have been instances where people have just made horrible technical errors. Like there was a band from Marblehead, no, Manchester by the Sea, years ago, that came in with a record, and in one of the songs, the drummer decided the drums weren't loud enough. You should never let your drummer mix your record, and so. He took the mix and tried to line it up with the drum tracks without really being in sync and mixed the drums back in. And basically the result was it sounded like somebody had left a vacuum cleaner turned on during the song. and he brought the track in and I hit play and I was like sitting there like, I'm going to turn around and look at this person and I got to think about what the next thing is I'm going to say. It was so messed up. So sometimes there's like stuff that just is whacked and goes wrong. Sometimes people just have really, pardon me, but they have like shitty listening environments. Mm-hmm. And that can result in a mix where it's like, little hard to hear the vocal. Is that okay with you? Yeah, where the reality is, I can't even hear the vocal a little bit. Yeah, and so
well, do me a favor because last night, because we had Nuno Bettencourt on our song, and I have a love-hate relationship with him. You told me an absolutely wild story about doing a record for him, and I need to hear it again because it's fantastic, and I feel like Cory and Siobhán will both appreciate this one.
Okay,
I love a good Nuno moment.
It was a sort of crazy scenario, and this is before. I mean, it's after FedEx, but it's like before the internet, really. So, nothing happened.
It's an interesting
easy.
window.
Nothing happened easy or fast at that point, and I got a call on a Saturday night. I had young kids. My kids are older and grown up now, but they were little, and I'm not. Yeah, it's the weekend, and the phone rings, and I pick it up, and it was probably a rotary phone. And hello, this is Nuno Bettencourt. I'm 30,000 feet over Kansas. I want to come in tomorrow and master a song. And first of all, I don't know how he got my number, but.
Well, he's calling you from an airplane in the 80s.
He's calling me from an airplane in the 90s.
That's pretty damn cool because you couldn't do it back then unless you were like James Brown.
Right. So either this is a crank call. So I had this moment where I'm like, do I hang up the phone or do I play along and find out what's going on here? So I said, okay, what time can you be at the studio? I gave him the address, 10 o'clock. Great. Shows up at the studio. It turns out it's really Nuno Bettencourt. He's got a 1/2-inch reel of tape in one hand with his mix. And he's also got a guitar and a guitar amp that he's bringing in. I'm like, okay, he's going to go to a gig or something. Go into the studio. I start to set up the machine, put the tape up.
He had other plans for you.
He starts tuning. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I'm going to try to master this record. And he thinks he's going to just practice while I'm doing it. Like, how is this going to work? And he's like, well, I need to cut some overdubs. So they'd already finished the record. They already mixed the thing. And he decided it needed more guitar.
A guitarist thinking it needed more guitar.
Yeah. So we flew in guitar tracks in the choruses as I was mastering the record, and that's what happened. But, so you have to be ready for anything.
With Nuno, of course.
Yeah.
There have been, like, these weird moments in my career where I've had that, like, decision point. Like, this seems crazy. Do I go along with this, or do I send it away? Is this going to be a waste of time or cost me money? Or
I feel like that's the perfect description for a career in music.
Yes,
finding that threshold. Yep.
That's probably where a lot of people end up getting
it's
married.
It's the name of this
too,
program.
Right?
There's a sweet spot where it's like, oh, all right, this is a little different today than what I'm used to doing.
Yes.
And it's like, all right, this is a lot different. Okay, this is getting weird. All right, I'm done with this shit.
Yeah.
There is a fun
it's like
spot
5
in there.
stages.
Yeah. Yeah. There was my favorite record that I ever worked on. Actually, I'm not going to name names right now.
Sure.
but I got a call from an artist who I absolutely adore, and she said, "Look, I want you to master my record. You've got to rescue it. Take as much time as you need." And basically, sort of opening the budget up, and that was kind of a different scenario.
Rescue it. How was it? It was an issue with the mix.
Yes, it was mixed by a very famous mixing engineer who was mixing in a room, and the mix engineer did not know what he was hearing because he'd never worked in the room before.
Interesting.
Can you give an example of something you had to do to rescue that mix?
It was interesting. One of the things, especially when you're using tape, one of the things that's interesting about it is that if you play back a tape on different tape machines, it sounds different. I mean, noticeably different. And so, and I had a bunch of them, so I worked on the record several times using different tape machines as the source. And then I would use different kind of vintage and interesting outboard gear, sort of signal processors, and just listen to the signature or the stamp of the sound and find something that was actually going to suit the record. It was not a simple, like, just add a little treble and everything was good. And I was given the license to experiment that way and figure out what was going to make that record really sing.
Wow. So this is kind of a good example. We talked a little bit about how the technology, from back in the day is so different than nowadays and the different options you have. When you were mastering a record, say 20, 30 years ago versus today, now that you have all these tools, and I know you're a consultant to Isotope. Well,
yes.
I love Isotope. I use their products on every one of my mixes. But they, that is a technology that I'm sure that 30 years ago, mastering engineers would have given their left nut to have on some certain situations.
You didn't hold back on that one, Cory. I'm surprised.
It's done for tracks I've received that I didn't record that I've had to make some pretty drastic changes and fixes on. It's done some miraculous things. So in terms of that, how's your perspective on the tools now versus when you began, and how does it change your approach to the way you actually do a master?
No, actually, I mean, I can work faster. And, I have, like you said earlier, I have like 10,000 plugins. I use 7 of them. I know them. But also some of the new approaches to problems that we've had for ages are much more facile. Like I can get to the answer much more quickly now because we can do things in DSP, digital signal processing, we couldn't do before. And there's been some really cool innovations in that way. So it's definitely, in some ways I feel like I can be a little bit more intuitive and just like, I know exactly what to do here and I grab the thing and I do it. And I just have the right thing as opposed to trying to sort of cajole the analog thing to do the thing I want it to do. I don't have to experiment quite so much.
I have to ask you because I'm sorry because it popped into my head because it's so important. One of the first times I had ever heard of like people using Isotope and all that kind of stuff was like on Ghost Hunters, because they have these EVP, these electro voice phenomenon as they call it, where they basically use all these filters and then at whatever high frequencies for us plebeians that don't know what's going on, there's ghosts talking like Johnny died here. Johnny says, "Don't come in." Is that real?
Did you ever see the movie The Conversation?
No.
You have to watch it with Gene Hackman. It's the only time.
I love Gene Hackman.
It's a very dark movie, but it's the only movie I can think of where the audio engineer is the hero. And he's actually doing, it's like surveillance and forensic audio and kind of related to it. So you have to watch that movie.
Oh, yeah, it's on the
Interesting.
Anyway, so I've done work for the Defense Department trying to dig out what was being said when somebody was trying to extort money in an arms deal. So the ghosts, I don't know. I think you're sort of on your own there. I'm not going to.
There's a lot of whole networks devoted to it, so I was just curious for financial reasons.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways that like sound can travel through the air and end up being induced into a circuit and show up in some audio somewhere. And so I don't know.
That's
I know
No,
sound
go ahead.
bounces in 45-degree angles, right? So like as long as I know that.
Sure. Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
But that's interesting. Have you like, can you tell us about some other unusual things you've been called on to do for your ear that may not relate to music or something? Because I would have never thought of that. But yeah, I mean, you're a master at hearing things. So
well, I was hired to consult on a chipset. So one of the weird things is that phone manufacturers, one of the things they care about is how the audio sounds and how loud their phone is. Like the phone needs to be loud, and there's like a loudness war among phone manufacturers. And so
I want to get into that on the next episode, by the way, for mastering, but that's interesting. It's also with phones.
So they design chipsets with limiters and multiband compressors. I mean, if you drive too much level into the speaker, it'll burn up. So you have to, there's sort of a tolerance you have to work within. Anyway, so I was asked to consult on circuits to help a chipset manufacturer optimize the DSP in the phone to make the phone sound better. So that was not something I expected.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that people don't think about. If someone says, "Oh, I'm an audio engineer," like, "Oh, so you work in your basement and make beats? Is that what you do?"
Right.
To know that there is actually the word engineering in there, and there is a lot of knowledge that I'm not saying every audio engineer has, but there is a lot of industry where that knowledge is very applicable in ways that most people would never really think of. Now you are, is this still up to date? Are you the president of AES?
I am the past president of AES.
Past president. I think
I am gradually.
You need to update your damn site, bro.
I'm gradually peeling away the hats so I can start doing some other things that I want to be doing.
So I'll pick this up. As past president of AES, you have even more unique perspective on the technology of audio engineering, and we're about 10 minutes left in this episode, so I don't want to dive too deep, but I would like to in the next
I'm waiting
episode
for the loudness war.
know more
Guys, wait
about
for next week.
Yeah, there's just so much more to the world of audio than I think people fully appreciate, and not for any other reason than if your favorite song sounds good coming out of the radio, who cares? You know what I mean? Let's just take the last 10 minutes or so and talk about what's your day-to-day look like right now. In terms of are you you're peeling off some hats, but what are you trying to focus on right now?
I mean, so it's a mixture of I'm teaching. I'm actually in the middle of writing some new curriculum. I am the chair of the Audio Engineering Society convention that's happening next month in New York City. So I'm getting ready to tie a bow on that. And there's some stuff to do to get to the finish line, helping people I'm curating the program, the technical sessions, and making sure that everybody has what they need there. I'm mastering records. I'm actually finishing a couple of records for some local artists. I probably should be doing right now instead of talking to you, but I love talking to you. And so don't tell.
The most honest words ever
spoken. We all have
spoken.
work we should be doing right now.
This is how we avoid our actual work.
90 Day Fiancé is on live right now, and I'm not watching it.
There you go. And have I forgotten anything that I'm doing right now? I mean, that's where it's at. So
for the mastering, are you doing, do you have a quota of work you do that, or are you just kind of taking it as it comes in, or do you try to delegate certain time that you're working in the mastering versus teaching versus everything else?
No, it's pretty fluid. And I'm really fortunate in that, I spent about 30 years being solely in production, and that was my gig, and I had to hustle to make sure that I could make ends meet, and didn't always, it wasn't stress-free. Let's put it that way. But now there are two things I have going for me. One is I've probably worked for 8,000 or 9,000 unique clients and artists during my career. And so if 1% of the people that I've worked with call me in a given week, I'm already too busy. So there are people who are calling me and saying, so you did my record last year, would you do another one? So there are records that continue to pop up. But I never know how much it's going to be. And I've also got other stuff that helps pay my bills. And, not to sort of be depressing or anything, but, the music industry for artists is really, really hard right now. And to try to make a go of it as a producer or a mastering engineer is, you have to hustle all the more.
Do you think it's a function of just like the internet or the presence of people just available? Is the quality higher? What do you think is the source of that?
You mean why is it tougher?
Yeah.
I think it's because everybody thinks that they can just turn on, it's like turning on your faucet and water comes out. They turn on their computer or their phone and music comes out, and they don't think about where it comes from. Mm-hmm. And so nobody's getting paid to make the music. I mean, you get paid for touring, you get paid for things around music. Music has become a commodity that fuels other things. It's part of content. But it's a much tougher business and a much different business. And there are people who are very clever who are doing fine, but it's different.
Well, I'm curious for someone like Cory, he's coming up in the last decade. Well, it's true. Why should he not work on making a plugin versus competing with a plugin that does what master? Because I've been paying $9.99 a track to send my plugin to a website where the best people from.
Website. Yeah.
No,
What are you sending to the website?
My bounce to the website, and then they send it back, and it's mastered, and it's $9.99, and it says the world's greatest mastering engineers. Why would I not spend $10 versus you?
Well, I mean, let's think about this for a second. How
Loaded
can you
question.
actually possibly be getting the attention of a person who's listening to your music and trying to figure out what you were trying to do and doing something that fits it for $9.99? How is that even possible?
Doesn't matter. It's louder.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree with you 100%. I have no idea.
It's red book. It's red book mastered. It looks like a perfect square on my screen.
I think
these are two different things, right? But there is exactly what you're saying, and that is a thing. And if that's working for people, great. But there is no human element. There is no collaboration. There is nothing about what happens at that stage that has anything to do with your music. They're just measuring it's sort of like going to, I don't know, name of, Filene's, that doesn't exist anymore. Going to Filene's basement and getting a
it
suit.
does. It exists in Europe still.
Filene's
yeah.
basement is also extinct. But I
Okay.
love that store. I got
I
so many good
know.
clothes there.
It's like
I
TJ
know.
Maxx.
Off Saks.
It's like going
Nordstrom.
clothes shopping at TJ Maxx. There you go. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But, what are we doing here? I mean, if this is a creative endeavor and there's some vision we're trying to realize and some joy, why are you turning it into a commodity? And if that's what it works for you, that's cool. That's fine.
Do you ever find the guy at TJ Maxx going, I don't get paid enough to fucking answer that question, you weirdo?
Yes, that is exactly TJ Maxx. That is the whole vibe. It's like
But I bet a lot of it comes down to just an information gap and knowing what is it that you're asking for with mastering.
Literally, and thanks for saying that. What I was going to say is the reason I'm so happy that you're on the show right now is I feel like there's a large community of music producers, engineers, and musicians that are teaching themselves which is great that there's those resources out there. But there's a lot of echo chamber stuff going on, and depending on the source you're using to learn, you might get in with people that maybe are unscrupulous in their teachings, and they heard something and they're regurgitating to people, and you get to this level where people do think mastering is just the step that makes it slam, and so when then they find this service is $10 that makes whatever, maybe not great mix louder but still not great, to them that's a successful mastering job. So having you explain the detail and the care that can go into it is, I think, really important for people to understand. And, like I said, I think the best way to put it is like you can buy a suit off the rack, right? And it looks okay, it gets the job done, but if you go get it tailored, you're going to look dope, and same thing, your record's going to sound great if it's actually customized by someone that cares and takes their time.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that one way to look at it is a year after you release something, are you going to remember the amount of money you spent on the master, or are you going to remember how proud you were of the record?
Absolutely, though. I agree 100%.
Yeah. But anyway, I think that's well said. I mean, there's a lot to unpack about that. It's one of the reasons I actually got into education is to be able to sort of understand and then figure out how to communicate what I think is important at the heart of what we do. I don't have a moral opposition to AI mastering or to the $9.99 thing that's going on. That has its place in the world, and it's fact of the matter is it is in the world. So it's ridiculous to say, well, that shouldn't exist, because it does exist.
Let me ask you this. This is a very important question you just alluded to. You said AI mastering. So I've seen all these deep fakes. You probably know what I'm talking about, where you can see and there's, people at Google who genuinely think that the AI has gone sentient. And I know on paper that's really stupid, and it didn't happen. But it's becoming so indiscernible. Do you think that there's going to be a point where technology becomes so good that sending it to an AI mastering thing will just be a plug-in, and it literally will be indiscernible from a Bob Ludwig or a Ted Jensen or anything that you could ever do? It's exponentiality, right?
That's a very
beautiful way
answer,
to cap the episode, I'm sure.
Yeah,
ladies and gentlemen, and that's mastering.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's true. There's probably a lot of elements that need to go into that, but
There are. We're a ways away from that, but inevitably we're heading in that direction. Where we end up, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, we can dive.
I'll tell you where you do end up.
speculation.
There's going to be Ellison coffee, and it's delicious. I will tell you, man.
I'm still waiting on mine, man. I've been
I
craving.
have not gotten any Ellison
Where's
coffee,
that?
by the
I
way.
gave you some the other day,
I had a
Cory.
glass. I had a glass of Ellison iced
All right,
coffee.
You need
I'll
to
tell
get
you
another
what.
bag of that and put it in the mail, because I've got no Ellison coffee, and that's why I'm
I'll
drinking
give you-
wine right now.
I'll give Cory a bag of it, but man, so I got to tell you guys.
What
if
am I
you don't-
missing?
Oh,
you
you've
don't
not
crush
had
your own
Ellison-
beans.
Ellison coffee.
Well, listen, David Ellison, the illustrious musician formerly of Megadeth, plays with the Lucid, plays with Ellison Soto. He has his. Well, let's list this off. He has his own art that he's created with optical illusions with his bass that's now for sale. He has he has movies out. He has a nonfiction book about his life. He has a fiction book I think it's a detective novel with a whole. That's a series. What else does Ellison? He has his own
Before you
studio.
get carried away with
Hang on a
inaccurate information.
Hang
Okay.
on a
No, that's all
second.
true.
Hold
you
on.
said the word coffee. This is what I'm really interested in. like, what's up with the coffee?
So one of
It's
his
delicious.
business ventures is a coffee company, Ellison Coffee Company, and it's pretty tasty.
Rock and Rose.
I
It is-
love
it's-
good coffee. I've got my Rancilio Rocky and Sylvia pair over here. I mean, like good coffee. Did you ever? What's the name of the bass player? Is a bald guy. He played for King Crimson.
I know Robert
I feel like
Fripp,
Ben would
but-
know this.
I know
Yeah.
Robert Fripp from Fripptronics. but
Tony
that's why-
Levin.
Tony
yeah,
Levin.
Tony Levin.
He has a
If you
website.
said Chapman
He had
Stick, I would have known.
right. He has a whole page on his website dedicated to coffee machines. And when I saw that a long time ago, I was like, this guy knows what's important. So I started investing in good coffee machines, and I'm really interested in good coffee. So if that's good coffee, I want to know all about it.
Was it the MWorks website where I saw in the gear pages after the analog compressors and EQs, there was the whole section on the coffee machine that you had in the.
Thank you, Tony Levin. I mean,
Ooh,
he made.
I need to look that up because I also love good coffee.
So, well, then I guess the last thing I'll ask you about the good coffee machine. So I'm not a coffee drinker until recently. I had a Keurig at first, and that tasted like total horse shit. And I realized it was definitely about the heat for which it made the coffee. I don't know. The new coffee machine I have, which is a Ninja, which, by the way, everything Ninja I've had has been fantastic. Maybe it's an Epiphone, but it plays like a Gibson. It's amazing. And if I crush my beans, which, by the way, this Ellison Rock and Rose, which is a premium light roast coffee, I'm just smelling the bag right now, and the endorphin level it's tantamount to ecstasy.
I can smell the bag from here.
Yeah.
I wish I could smell the bag, but I didn't get any. So
Smell the glove instead.
We'll have to talk to
He
David and
doesn't
get
treat
that
you
hooked
all
up.
well enough.
I know, right? I just get excluded from all the good stuff.
I'll send David this video, and I'll say, hey, man, I don't live in the same state as this lady. Send her some damn coffee so we can talk about it in the next show.
The girl needs coffee.
You have his address. He just asked me my address, and I sent it to him. So maybe you should
David
say
Ellison?
something to him. Yeah,
It's
David
like
Ellison.
you said, oh, I'm not going to go to prom with you, so I'm like choice number 3. No thanks. Just kidding. Send me some coffee, David.
And on
You
that
gotta
note,
email him. He doesn't watch this show.
I'm just kidding. On that note.
Yes, this has been incredibly informative. It's been a pleasure talking with you, John, and I hope you'll hang out with us for part 2. And I would like to dive more into the, teaching as a professor at Berkeley and your work with Isotope and other areas of audio that aren't necessarily in the mastering side of things. But is there anything you want to let our several dozen listeners or viewers know about, including, and I have to say this because every time Ben says his mom's watching, my dad is watching as well. So we do have at least 2
that is so nice.
people checking this out. So hi, Dad. Thank you for checking this out as well.
Hi, Cory's dad.
Just thank you for keeping me up late.
It's our pleasure. That's what we do best. All right.
He could be working instead of talking to
It's
us.
only
Remember.
7:30, you old man.
Well, we'll have some links, MWorks mastering and all the other things you have going on. We'll put links in the description. And we will see you guys next week on 2020-2020-D.com.
It's actually in those big expensive studios that you come to realize that the gear is just, a means to an end. Because when you travel from studio to studio, like I was able to do, not every studio had the same stuff. And so you needed to accommodate. Like, it was like, I always use 421Ns on the toms, but they don't have any here. So what do? What do you guys use on the toms normally? Well, here we go. Let's use those then and see what happens. And you can't, again, unless you have to budget unlimited dollars, you can't halt a session and wait for 2 weeks for a microphone to become available or for somebody to run out and get new mics while you're sitting in a residential studio in the woods or whatever. None of that applies really. That's why it's that having to become creative was like, well, I've never used this mic before. I guess these are our overhead mics today, so let's see how it goes.